Alright, if you've been online at all, there's a chance that you might have been cyberbullied by somebody online claiming that web developers are not real developers or not real programmers. And you might have read this online somewhere, or maybe even heard somebody call you a SOYDEV. And you want to know if there's any truth to this claim that web developers aren't real programmers. So in this video, I just wanted to go over why web developers might not get the respect they deserve, and how you can avoid being one of those web developers that people look down on. So first off, let's not pretend that this stereotype is completely without merit, just because the barrier to entry for web developers is very low compared to something else. You don't need to get a 4-year computer science degree in order to become a front-end web developer, making HTML, CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript. I'm sure you know that there are coding boot camps out there that instead of 4 years of school, you can get it done in just 4 months of school, and then just be job ready after just 4 months of training. And while it's not necessarily a bad thing if you don't have a computer science degree or haven't studied for X many years, it's not necessarily a bad thing, because in order to become a front-end developer, you don't really need to learn too much. If all you ever want to be is just a developer that puts designs into HTML and CSS, that's perfectly fine. You are completely in your rights to do that. But on the other hand, it is important to learn computer science concepts like algorithms and all of these other things that you would learn in school. These things can be self-taught, and I would recommend learning them, just because I've never seen a case where learning new things and getting deeper into the field that you care about is a bad thing for you or your career. So you're never going to go wrong with learning more about programming. But you can see how somebody fresh out of a boot camp might be looked down upon by somebody who spent 4 or 8 years getting the necessary degrees. And let's be honest, some of these people who have just spent 4 months or just completely self-taught themselves how to program, the results can vary. Like, I've taken over some projects from some developers before that just had no idea what they were doing. Like, they learned a few key front-end concepts and then they didn't really understand everything completely. So the code that I got from them when I took over the project was just complete spaghetti code. So they were importing both React and jQuery and a whole bunch of different libraries that were conflicting with each other. And it just made no sense because they didn't really understand all the concepts. So maybe they learned some cursory understanding of it from a boot camp or an online class, but they didn't really have enough real-world experience to know when to use something, when not to use something. And so the code I got was just a complete mess. And of course, that's another problem with the whole JavaScript ecosystem that we have right now, in that you can get pretty far, at least in front-end development, with not totally knowing what you're doing. So a lot of it you can just cobble together with NPM packages. So instead of actually figuring out how to do a function by yourself, you can just import an NPM library to do it for you. Without any serious understanding of what's going on behind the scenes, all you see is a magic black box. You put your input into this box, you get a result out, and that's all you understand about it. And of course, these programmers are not going to be very good because they don't really understand how to do anything themselves. So if you sent them an actual problem that they have to think about and then come up with a creative solution, they just can't do it. Basically, they're just putting together different building blocks without really understanding how they go together. And that's why you get some of these developers that are just writing really bad quality code. And of course, with the modern JavaScript ecosystem, there's just so much going on. There's so many different moving parts. And if you want to make an application, you have to learn so many different things, especially if you want to stay on the bleeding edge of things. People are always coming up with new libraries and new solutions to some problems that have kind of already been fixed. They're just going over solved problems and trying to re-engineer or maybe over-engineer a new solution that doesn't really need to be done. That's why there are so many frameworks and so many libraries that it's just completely confusing to somebody just getting into web development. So it's been kind of trendy over the past few years to talk about server-side rendering, say in React.js. And server-side rendering is something we had long before React. So they're basically just solving the same problem again and again. Maybe it's a little bit more efficient the way they're doing it now, but you can see how this can make so many different frameworks and libraries that it's just a confusing mess that we have right now. Not to mention that a lot of web development right now is just over-engineered and bloated. So we have people using React.js for static websites, and these are just simple informational websites, maybe your portfolio or a blog, that don't need to be dynamically rendered every time you enter the page. So every time you enter the page, it uses React to build a whole web application just for a static website. And in my opinion, okay, don't hate on me, Gatsby nerds, but in my opinion, this is just way over-engineered. It doesn't need to be done for a static website. You're just using up too many resources that don't need to be used. You don't need to be downloading 70 kilobytes of JavaScript just to view a plain text page. And of course, like I said before, people not really understanding the core concepts and how to program basic things by themselves just makes a mess where you have to import a ton of different libraries into your project. And of course, you don't really understand all of them. And there's a lot of different things that can go wrong with them. There's a lot of different points of failure. So if you're building a very basic site and just importing tens and hundreds of JavaScript libraries to do basic functions that you should know how to do yourself, well, you can see the problem. The web is so bloated and over-engineered that just reading the news online will download like 20 megabytes of code into your machine just to parse a basic New York Times web page, which all you really need is text and a few images. And the main reason why the web is so slow today is just because of these kind of programmers who don't actually know what they're doing, making the web a more bloated place to browse. And of course, the web is so oversaturated now that people are building native applications as web applications now. I'm sure you've heard of Electron, which a lot of apps are made with. Say Spotify or Slack are built with Electron. And Electron is basically just a web browser. So every time you open up Slack, you're actually opening up a web browser or another instance of Chrome. And of course, you know how notorious Chrome is with eating up all your RAM and all of that. So you get these really slow, bloated native applications as well. Not just web applications, but it's also spreading to native applications, because people don't actually know how to code native applications as much anymore. It's just easier to do it in a web framework. So that's why a lot of these native applications are just slow and buggy as well. It's just the problem with all these web frameworks and things that I've been talking about. It's not just contained to the web now, it's spreading through everything as well. So you can see why people might be a little bit annoyed at the people making these applications. And finally, some people just might not like JavaScript, period. The language is not the greatest language of all time, to be honest. There's a lot of problems with it. There's a lot of gotchas, and working with some things is a huge pain, like dates. There's not really any good standard library like some other languages have. So maybe in order to do some basic functions, like if you want to check if two objects are equal, well, there's no real way to do that in JavaScript. You would have to import some library, maybe Lodash, just to do that, or just write a whole bunch of helper functions yourself, which is kind of annoying. And another reason why people are bringing in so many NPM packages just to do things like basic functions, because the language itself doesn't have a whole lot of those basic functions just brought in. Now, I know a lot of recent developments in JavaScript ever since ES5 have brought in a lot of new features, but still, compared to a lot of other languages, JavaScript is just a lot harder to use. There's a lot more gotchas, and unfortunately, it is basically what you have to use if you want to do anything on the web these days. All right, so you might be asking, how can I not be a SOYDEV? How can I not be one of these programmers who is just making the web worse and all of this? And what you can do is just learn more about programming, web development, and all of that. The more experience you have, the better you will be doing. Just learn more concepts and logic. Like, actually try to build some things yourself instead of just importing libraries for everything. And maybe realize that for some small websites or some small projects, you don't need to bring in a huge third-party library like React.js. Instead, you can just code it with vanilla JavaScript, HTML, CSS. Just be more efficient with your projects. And maybe you're one of the people who clicked on this video because you feel like you're not a real programmer. Because maybe in the back of your head somewhere, you actually do feel like you're not a real programmer. Or I guess the new trendy word for this is imposter syndrome, where you feel like you don't really fit in and that people are just going to expose you for not actually knowing what you're doing. And of course, the easiest way to get over imposter syndrome is to just get more experience. So build more real-world projects, go out and make something you're interested in, learn some new concepts, and just build a whole bunch of projects and gain experience, and then your feelings of being an imposter will kind of disappear. At least that's been my experience. So the more I've been learning, the more or the less and less I worry about this. So now if I hear somebody say a web developer isn't a real programmer, it doesn't hurt me, it doesn't affect me. I don't pay it any mind because I know it's not true for me at least. Because I know I have confidence enough where it just doesn't apply to me. Like before when I was just starting out, okay, maybe a client would come to me and talk to me about something and I had no clue how to do something. And yeah, of course, it gives you a lot of anxiety if you don't know how to do something. But the more I learned, and okay, there's some trial and error, I had to learn from some people where my mistakes were. But the more and more I learned, it's just the more confident I got. So now I'm confident enough, I can walk into a room with any client, they can ask me how to do something, and 99% of the time I will know exactly what to do. It just comes with experience. So yeah, if you're getting cyberbullied by these people that are claiming you're not a real programmer, prove them wrong by becoming more of a real programmer. Learn some more concepts, get some more experience, build some more projects. That's my advice to you. And just don't stress out so much about what random people on the internet have to say about you.